Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Rich Woman Rising podcast. I'm your host, Eloise Tomkins, and I help women to regulate their nervous system around money so that they can create more wealth. And today, I am so excited. I was saying to my guests that I was fangirling over their Instagram content. So excited to have Clare Woods on the show. Clare is an incredible money mentor, author, speaker, and podcaster. She is a qualified accountant, a CPA, but she is definitely not your average bean counter. She uses her money mentoring powers for good, and she helps service-based businesses to scale while creating a lifestyle that they love. And she runs a really cool program called the Profit Academy, which is an online school that has been developed to help business owners to increase their profits exponentially. So I am super thrilled to have Clare share her money story with us today because she obviously works in the money space, but it hasn't always been smooth sailing. So I think it's going to be a really cool conversation, Clare. I'm super excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Ellie.
Do you want to tell us a little bit from your perspective about what you do and how you got into the money coaching space?
Yeah, for sure. So, my business journey actually started later in life. I worked as an accountant, was where I spent most of my career. And then I moved into management, working as a commercial manager. And then when I was on maternity leave with my first son, I got made redundant, which in Australia happens to one in four women, can you believe, in today's day and age? So I got made redundant, and my husband had just started a business. He started it when I was 7 months pregnant. And so I was with this little baby helping my husband with his business. And he was like, "Whoa, you're really good at this." And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I am." This is what, because basically I'd been doing this for big businesses. I'd been a
Mm.
coach, but for big corporates. And he's like, "Maybe people would pay you to do this sort of work." So that's basically the story of how I got started. And yeah, basically I put it out there. I hired a business coach, got my first client, and then my business grew pretty quickly, which I was very blessed about. And that was 9 years ago. Since then, I've been on, whoa, such a journey, as most business owners do go on. And I've written a book, I've become a speaker. And yeah, this is 100% my life's work.
I love that. And it's interesting that you say, business is a journey and most people go on it. But, the interesting thing that I find is that a lot of women don't go on it. A lot of women have a lot of fear. And I'm curious because I know we touched on this just before we hit record. It hasn't always kind of been that way for you. Like, did you have that confidence going into your business and to just blow things up as you went along? Or did you have to, like, how did you navigate that?
Hell no. So I'll tell you the story. I think I first had the nudge to start a business in my 20s. I remember meeting someone who ran a business and I was just obsessed and fascinated. I thought it was the coolest thing. I wanted to do it. Then in my early 30s, I was single, traveling around, and I met this guy we were doing Sail Croatia. It's this big sailboat and it's a ton of fun. Anyway, each day he would disappear downstairs for an hour or two. One day I said to him, I'm like, "Where do you go?" And he said, "Oh, I'm working. I'm actually a graphic designer." And he'd been traveling basically indefinitely and just that's what he did. And that's when I was like, whoa, that's what I want to do. Imagine having that much freedom
Mm.
and flexibility. I still didn't have the courage to start my own business. I had all these stories around I don't have enough money. I don't have enough capital. Who's going to pay all the bills? At this point, I was single. I had not really a ton of responsibilities. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't even have a phone plan, but I just didn't have that courage or faith to take the leap. And ironically, the time when I actually did was when I had an enormous Sydney mortgage. My husband had just started a business and I had a newborn baby. But the universe gave me a big, so right, here's your shove out the door. And that's why I encourage other people who are feeling that nudge. I'm like, do it, take
Mm.
the chance, because I look back now and I think how much easier it would have been actually to do it in a different chapter in my life rather than when I did. And yeah, but like I said, I'd like to say it's been smooth sailing, but it's certainly been It's been a roller coaster.
That is
And
definitely a word that I hear a lot when it comes
yeah,
to business. Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
How, like, I'm curious about your relationship with money, particularly as a money coach yourself. Like, talk us through what that has looked like, because I know now, like, one of the things that drew me to you was your really big, ambitious goals and the fact that you are not scared to say, hey, I want to be on this yacht and have this incredibly amazing not even a once in a lifetime opportunity, but to be able to have that experience. And I found a way to create the life that I love and have this house and home that I have been dreaming of by the water. How did you get to that version of you?
Yeah. So my story started when like, I'm an accountant by trade. I grew up in a family without a lot of money. I'd say we were probably on the borderline of poverty. We weren't like we always had clothes and food, but we never went on holidays. We didn't have extra. I guess we just didn't have extra.
Mm,
Very different to the world that my kids have grown up in when they're like, when am I going on a plane again? And I'm like, I didn't even go on a plane till I was 23 years old. I never, ever, ever remember my parents having a cup of coffee, something that my husband does on the daily,
mm,
takeaway coffee. And I think that just those little, yeah, we didn't have extra. And then becoming an accountant, I obviously learned to be very conservative with money and, you cut your costs and you stay lean and you get a decent, stable job. And that's sort of what you do. And that was my life for a while. And then when I started my business, a friend of mine told me about this money coach. Her name's Denise Duffield Thomas. And anyway, I started following this woman and I'm like, what? She's talking about like big dreams.
mm,
And she shared about how she wanted to buy a waterfront home. She then went on and bought it. And I then did her courses and I learned all about the concept of money mindset, about manifestation, all of these what I thought were woo woo concepts. And Denise is now a friend of mine. I then went on, set an intention to, I want to own a waterfront home. And a couple of years ago, three years ago now, we actually did buy a waterfront home. And so I've got a 18-meter beach at the back of our house. Shit house. Hopefully, I'm allowed to swear on the podcast. If not,
you are.
beep. Crappy house. But we've got the most incredible block of land that I know that we're going to build our dream house on one day. And someone said to me when I wrote my book, because in my book I talk about, buying the waterfront property and how we want to build our dream home here. And someone said, aren't you going to feel a bit silly if you don't build the house one day? And I'm like, well, no, because I'm going to.
Mm,
And I feel like my journey has got me to a point where I have such a level of confidence about my ability to create wealth that it's like, okay, maybe it has, I'd sort of thought it would happen within 3 years, but I know that it will happen. And that growth has really been the work that I've just done on my mindset, on how I think about money, on how I feel about money. And the
mm,
transformations have materialized off the back of that belief system because that's essentially how things work in life. If you think I can't do that, well, you can't. And as someone who had a crippling, I had my first podcast I was ever a guest on, I had a panic attack. My fear
mm,
of public speaking was so bad. And now I literally don't get the slightest bit nervous. I've done it so many times that I'm a
mm.
speaker now. Um, when I was in my corporate job, if I had more than three people in a meeting room, I'd run out and take a Valium because my anxiety was so bad. And now I've just done a tour traveling around Australia because I've reframed my belief that I believe I can do it. And so therefore I take the actions that align with that and therefore I create the outcomes. And so as much as manifestation and all that sounds a bit woo-woo, it's actually really rooted in brain science and having beliefs, rewriting your beliefs around money and then actually taking the actions that align with it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And as you were talking, all it was like a little light bulb flashing in my head with one word going, identity, identity, because
Mm,
you've stepped into that identity of Claire who knows that she is capable of achieving the goals. And when somebody says, aren't you going to look like a fool? Like, well, no, because I back myself,
yeah.
but also you don't need other people to back you either. And you're right on that. Like I see so many women who experience that fear of what other people think, and myself included. Like, I went through that too, right? And it's almost this deconditioning in a sense of unlearning a lot of the stuff that we've had in the past and asking for help, because I don't think that we can shift this on our own.
Yeah. I mean, I've done so many courses, I've worked with so many mentors, and it's like an onion.
Mm.
You just keep peeling back the layers, and anytime you think you've nailed it, there's something new there. It's
That's
therapy all over again. It's
100%.
therapy all over again.
100%. It's like the subconscious, like I see that as the subconscious blocks, right? Like, okay, we can see this surface level thing, problem, belief, but then what's underneath that? What's underneath that? What's underneath that? And you
Mm.
get to the root of it. And then another onion. I don't know how onions grow. Do they sprout back up?
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm not a gardener, but I'm imagining that there's multiple onions, you don't just have one. But so growing up in this environment when you were younger, like around not having enough, and then kind of moving into the accounting field and then having these desires, like, gosh, I just can't help but think like that's such an evolution. What were some of the hardest things that you had to navigate through that?
I think the biggest thing that I've had to navigate through is me, my fears, my limitations, and also the external voices. Because when you do go on a transformation, people around you are going to share their 2 cents. My dad is very anti rich. He talks about, I remember one time I came to his house and he goes, the elite with their BMWs think they're so good. And I just bought a BMW. I was like, yeah, thanks, Dad.
Did he
So,
know that at the time?
what's that?
Did he know that you had the BMW?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a backhanded dig. Um, but, that's his money stuff. And I think that on the journey, I started to grow because, I grew up in, a humble home and grew up with, very humble beginnings. And I think that I have this, yeah, I'm like, am I getting too big for myself? Are my dreams getting too big? Am I getting too arrogant? And, one of my big values is I like that people think I'm down to earth. But then I also, on the flip side, I talk about how most of the time I fly business class now. And I'm like, is this really down to earth? And is it okay for me to have these big desires and to continue to want to have more
Mm.
and create more and impact more people? And yeah, you're just constantly coming up against those stories.
My gosh, I love that. And it's so fascinating. Like, I remember when I don't think I'd even started my business at this point. I was just kind of toying around with it because I relate to you saying, oh, it took me years to start my business. Same. And a friend said to me, like, I was kind of like, I want to create this in my business. And she was just like, but why? Like, that's so greedy. And I looked at her dead in the face and I was like, so you're telling me that you are okay living in your tiny apartment with half a wardrobe because one half is full of a water heater that you can't actually use the said wardrobe. You want that for the rest of your life and rent and have the rent go up by hundreds of dollars each month and you get no say. I'm like, no, I'm sorry, that does not sound good to me. That doesn't sound great. And when I look back, I realize that's her money story, just like your dad.
Mm.
But if we can't separate it, it becomes so we can absorb it as our own. And then what you're saying, like around flying business class and then wanting to be down to earth, it's interesting how that belief system of business class equals or might equal not being down to earth. Um, and those stories that we have, how do you untangle them?
I think a big thing that's really helped shift things for me is the circles that I'm in
Mm,
because I've, over the years, intentionally and unintentionally, like the circles that I mix in are people with more and more money. And,
mm,
most of the people I hang out with now are multimillionaires. So it's just so normalized to me. And the stories that when I was younger, I used to have about what rich people are like, Richie Rich sitting there counting their money. I'm like, honestly, like most of the wealthy people I know, you wouldn't even know. Like, so,
mm.
the first time I might go to the house and I'm like, oh, you're like rich, rich. And realizing people are lovely and humble and giving and, doing good things in the world. And
Mm.
that sort of really made me realize, yeah, there's some people who are wealthy and horrible people, but there's also a lot of people with no money who are also horrible people. So I think for me, intentionally surrounding myself with people and being like, oh, that's actually not true. And, the more time that I've sat in business class, the more I'm like, they're all just lovely, nice, normal people who just happen to have a little bit more money than other people. And so I think that the company you keep has really helped. And also just identifying when things are coming up, like, where's this story coming from? Is it true? Really getting to dive deeper and explore that. Another truth that I fundamentally believe is that the more money you have, the more impact you can create.
Mm.
And I really believe that money in the hands of good people, I've seen this, that people get amplified the more, when you've got more money, basically the kind of person that you are. I know when I first got money, I was 25. I moved to London. I got a really great job as an accountant there. And I think I'm naturally a generous person. And so I was shouting people and I, flew my 19-year-old brother over and paid for a trip around Europe for him. And that was kind of like, whoa, I can just be more generous. As I've been on a journey around my own personal confidence, as someone who really struggled with confidence a lot when I was younger, now I'm like, I'm becoming more confident because I can buy myself nice clothes, or I can afford to do things. And it actually helps me to be a more confident version of myself, having the financial resources behind me.
I love that so much. The amplification of who you already are. Like it's so fascinating because you see people who have money who are not good people. But likewise, the opposite is true. And interesting, like I remember when working as a psychologist, there was a time I was working in a very pointy end of mental health and working with families who were very like low income, below the poverty line. Like they were really struggling. They're in survival mode and trying to just make ends meet. And they had a lot of fear around money, resources, and all of that, which I totally understand. But then I started working in private practice, working with women and men, but they were uh, living in an affluent area. And a lot of the women that I would work with were experiencing a lot of the same like physical symptoms that and stresses that the families who had nothing were experiencing. And that was kind of when my eyes kind of shifted, like it's not about the money. I mean, it is, but it isn't. Like you need money to survive. But once your basic needs are met and you start earning more, it's not about the money, it's about your belief system and the identity that you hold around money. Did you find that for yourself that as your income started to grow, those stories still kept popping up and
Oh,
until you did the work?
oh, and no, they still do keep popping up.
Well,
I
that
mean,
too.
I'm going to be completely honest. And, I witness this with my clients as well. Most of my clients are sort of multi 6 to 7 figure business owners.
Mm,
And, I've had calls with people who are like having breakdowns and
mm,
they're like, my business is falling apart and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah. And you also still made $80,000 last month,
mm,
which can sound super triggering to some people, but I'm also like, people with this business that size, they've also got a hell of a lot of like the stakes just get bigger. They've got bigger teams, they've got bigger bills, they've got bigger tax bills. Like, I
mm.
think you think when I reach a certain point that a money stress isn't going to be real anymore, but it's like it actually really also is a very real thing because it's not just you then. You've got like teams of people and families that are dependent on you for their financial stability as well, which in itself is a whole other layer of stress and pressure. So, yeah, it's really, really interesting watching the journey, watching my own journey, watching my own stories that keep popping up again and again. And also remembering that no matter what stage of business you're at, it's cyclical. And there's going to be times where times are tough and business is tough. And then there's going to be times where it's flowy and easy and you're feeling magnetic. So, yeah, there's so much in this.
There really is. There really is, and oh my gosh. That's why I love the work that I do, because like when you are able to shift that identity and know, even if you do have one of those lower periods, you are still going to reach your goals because you inherently are capable of attracting wealth and it's easy.
Yeah. I
Maybe.
know that my bookkeeper, who hasn't done a lot of this sort of work, there's been times where, across my husband and I, two completely volatile businesses, massive mortgage, two little kids, and she's looking at our numbers and she's like, what the actual, like, and him and I are like, it's going to be fine. We're going to do this. It'll work. And then, it turns around and she's just, I can watch her witness this whole thing and be like, how do you hold your energy, your nervous system through those turbulent times? And I guess that this is a testament to the work that we've both done, that
Mm.
we're able to be like, but we know that everything's going to work out fine and we just need to do things differently or tweak or play with the strategy. And I watch her witnessing it and she's just like, what on earth is going on here? It seems really foreign to her.
I love that. And I'm so curious because I have this visual, like I get very visual in my mind sometimes. And I almost am wondering, like, if you held that same type of energy that hypothetically your bookkeeper did, and you were making decisions from that place, how do you think that version of Claire would make decisions? And how do you think that business would turn out if you were still operating from that space?
Yeah, and I think that that's the whole reason why this work is so important is because when you're operating in a place of fear, lack, scarcity, that's exactly if that's how you identify, if that's your belief system, you are going to create those outcomes because that's the
Mm.
capacity that you're operating from. Now, obviously, the accountant in me needs to still be realistic. Like I see some people online, they're like, you should hire a $100,000 coach and sell your house.
Mm.
And I'm like, yeah, like I think you've actually still got to balance the practicalities of the real world in which we live.
Mm.
But also, like, if you want to create growth, you probably do need to invest in your business. If you want to step into a new level of mindset, you need to surround yourself by that energetic frequency, or else
Mm.
you're going to be constantly hearing, what a waste of money. Don't do that. You're never going to make it. You need to be surrounded by, hey, we know how the brains are programmed by the people we spend our time with.
Mm.
And so the more that you can be investing into your business, spending time in the energy of next level people, like the more likely it is that you are going to create more positive outcomes for yourself. If you are operating from a space of look what the black and white numbers are saying, it's all doom and gloom, well, that's you're then going to make decisions. You're going to contract, you're going to, step back. You're not going to be showing up and marketing your business in a
Yeah.
positive, abundant, magnetic way.
Oh, 100%. And it's so true. Like our brain, it filters. Our brain will filter only the information that we currently identify with. And it happens subconsciously. Like it's wild. I think I am a psychologist. I have spent over a decade learning about this. And yet when I really think about it, which I do because, this is the work that I do. But I'm like, oh my God, it's wild how our brain does all of this stuff, just automatically. But it will focus on evidence. And I kind of, use the example like you said, if you focus on scarcity and you, I don't know, have a bill that comes in and you forgot to pay it. So now you get another bill and it's got that red stamped invoice. You will focus on that and you will not focus on the fact that your client paid you in full. And both of like, your brain will continue to find evidence. And that's why, like, I talk about micro moments a lot because I think to retrain our subconscious, we need to look for those little micro moments every day where we can pull new information in to retrain our subconscious to a nervous system to find information that is going to expand our capacity. And I love that about being around other people and other like in terms other multimillionaires, right? I remember like I just said that millionaire just then, multimillionaires. Past version of me would have like struggled to even say multimillionaire out loud. I would have felt like a fraud. So you're right, by being able to surround yourselves in those circles, or not even the circles, but to those experiences, helps to align you and your identity with the goals that you have for yourselves, because so many people give up. It's too hard. It's not possible for me. I don't know how to do that. And so I'm not going to bother. Or what I see a lot, and I don't know whether you see this a lot with your clients as well. And I agree that you definitely need the practical side of things. Absolutely. Not my wheelhouse, but I agree with you that it's 100% important. But what I will also see is people trying to do affirmations or more strategy or continue doing more rather than actually like doing that deeper level work. Because I don't know if this was your experience, but doing that work can be bloody uncomfortable and not exactly always fun.
Yeah. And I think, like, let's switch it away from money for a second. So, one of my friends has just become a runner.
Mm.
And it was so interesting because I'm like, I'm not a runner. I hate running. And so, because I don't identify as a runner, guess what? I don't run.
Hmm.
And so she's like, oh, I'm doing this thing and I'm doing this thing. And I'm like, no, I
Mm.
can't run. I'm not a good runner. I've never been a good runner. And I was like, wow, look at all these stories that you've got there. Of course, I mean, of course, I'm not going to run a marathon because everything I'm telling myself is,
Hmm.
well, that's not who I am. That's not what I do. So I'm not going to take the action that's aligned with
Mm.
that. And essentially, that's the same with money. You know, I identify as a wealthy person, and therefore I am continually going to keep taking action to move me closer to that goal. But
Hmm.
that work is deep work. You know, if because even if you're doing the things but you don't have the core belief system, like if I went out for a run right here right now with and I just ran. I'd be like, my brain would be like, see, like I'd get puffed, I'd get a stitch, and I'd be like, see, I'm not cut out for this. Or I'd get a blister and I'd be like, I knew that I'm not a runner. And everything I'd be filtering is through that lens of my
Yeah.
belief system. Whereas like my brother, who's like, oh my gosh, he's like an ultra marathon. I don't know, he does all the things. He's an Iron Man. Um,
Mm.
you know, like if he went and got a stitch, or he'd just be like, oh, you know, like I've got to get back to it. Like I've witnessed him get injuries, and it just instead of me being like, oh my gosh, your body's telling you something, he's like, no, it's not. He's like, I've just hurt myself. I need to get back to what I do. And this is basically the same thing. Like when my bookkeeper's witnessing us going through a
Mm.
bit of like a cash flow crunch or something. And I'm just like, but no, this is what we do. Like I've just got a bit of a sore toe or I've got a stitch and we'll get through it and it's going to be fine. So that's why this deep work is so important because you'll keep doing the things if you fundamentally believe that this is what you're meant to do.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And if anyone can take anything away from that conversation, hit rewind for the last 2 minutes and re-listen to that section because you just absolutely nailed it, and it's hard. It is hard. And I think sometimes, and I don't know whether this was the case for you, where there was this like pivot point in your life that kind of led you, because it sounds like, growing up with your dad, for example, who does have that view of rich people who you now are, right? Like, well, one, I'm curious if how your relationship is with dad with that, because that in and of itself, like that dynamic would have shifted, or maybe even shifted some of his money narrative, or maybe not. But growing up in that environment and then shifting your identity to actually, well, hey, money is actually fun and I can have it and I can be a good person and have money. I think I'm asking two questions there because I'm curious about both. But what I was ultimately getting at was that pivot point. Like, did you have that pivot point?
I honestly think that pivot point was when I started following this money coach years ago
Ah,
and I started
yeah.
watching her content. And at the start, I was like, what? What's she talking about? This doesn't even make. So you just think positive about money and then you become rich. Rubbish. And then the more that I like lent into it and understood it and immersed myself in this world, I've actually come on this whole big journey that's really changed the whole way that I think about money. You know, I invested in her course before I
Mm.
even had the money. That was an example of where I remember the first payment was $200. It was a $2,000 course. And I was like, $200? I don't know, $200. And then the last minute, I had $200 in my account and I paid for the first payment, being like, I don't know how I'm going to pay this course off. And that was probably a real turning point for me, was investing in myself and in my money mindset. And it's just changed a lot since then.
There was always something in you that sounds like you wanted more out of your life,
Yeah.
that you wanted more. And I think I see this a lot, like again, I relate to that of wanting more. And like I was just, I don't know, writing a blog post, I don't know, I was doing something, writing something about like my experience when I was a kid. I swear I would watch TV and see them like Home Alone, not Home Alone, Home Improvement, that have this huge giant house. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I would love to live in a, giant house like that. And I'm like, I want money because money will give me that house. But then on the flip side, also grew up witnessing my parents arguing about money and not having enough, or going on holidays, but they weren't the kind of holidays that were cool holidays. They were like camping, caravan park holidays. And the discrepancy between what I saw other people have versus what I had, I was like, oh, well, I guess that's just not possible for me. But there was still that other part that was like, but I want it. And I want to make that part louder for other women, like kind of like you. It was there. And then you turned up the volume of that. You started listening to it, and, bless Denise for putting that content out there so that you could kind of get that awareness. Because that's what I'm kind of hearing, is that awareness is the first step. And I think we do have more awareness now of money, thanks to social media and being in business, but it's something that I think a lot of people still kind of struggle with.
Yeah, 100%.
And your dad, I'm still curious about that.
What was this? What was this? That question I've forgotten.
I know.
How's my
Yeah,
dad's
because like,
perception changed? It's
yeah.
really funny because my dad, he he actually hasn't worked in like 20 years,
Mm,
but he's married someone not ultra wealthy, but she's got money. And
mm.
so my dad, he travels and one day he made some comment and I was like, you realize the irony that, like, basically, you're traveling the world because someone else has money. Like,
Oh my gosh.
I,
And so wealth can be a good thing, and it sounds
yeah,
like dad hasn't been able to quite catch up. Like, and I see that
yeah,
like with, older, like it can be hard. My dad would be the same, like catching up those, and linking those things together. But I love that. I love that he's getting to experience all these things, because money can be freaking fun,
yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
when we take the pressure off money and allow ourselves that permission to have that house by the water, to be able to fly business class. Like, I don't know, personally, the idea of being cramped in a seat, like in the middle seat, particularly with other people, sounds awful. Like, why wouldn't you want to look after yourself?
Yeah.
But I know that you have, well, first of all, thank you for sharing so much of your journey. It's been incredible to hear your story, like, and from where you've come from to where you are today, because I think it's so personally for me empowering to just understand that it can be done, even if those old stories have been there. It doesn't have to stay that way. So I really love hearing that identity shift and the possibility that's available. So thank you for sharing that. And the other thing that I want to touch on, or ask you about, is I know that you have a masterclass for people as well that they can go and download. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I do. I've got a ton of amazing freebies on my
You do.
website. Um, I have one that's called Four Steps to More Profit, which is on my website. I've also got some money affirmations. I know we spoke about those earlier. So there's a couple of different things that people can go download, be in my world. And I've also got a podcast, which I very creatively called the Clare Wood podcast.
It's
I
very
know.
original. I love it. It's great.
Creativity is my strong point. And I talk a lot on my podcast about money, about the various challenges that business owners have around money and supporting them to get through that. So, yeah.
It's a really good podcast. I have definitely binged a few of, not all of your episodes, but I've definitely binged quite a few, and the practical side of it, and also just your personal, like, uh, stories throughout are just fabulous. So thank you so much for sharing. I'll pop your info in the show notes for everyone to listen or to access as well. But thank you, Claire, for joining us on the show. And for everyone else, I will see you all again next week.
Thanks for having me, Ellie.